Shall we just do an intro and begin?
Well, why not?
Why not? You're listening to About Buildings and Cities. I'm Luke Jones.
I'm George Gingell.
We're continuing our project on Jože Plečnik. We're finally getting to...
We've had quite a long go in the recording, so we may not remember very much.
Yeah, it's a bit of a... We're going to have to try and pick up the sort of threads where we've left them, but they've been left in the cupboard for a couple of months because of life intervening in various ways. So we're getting on to the good bit. We're going to talk about Ljubljana. We're going to talk about Plečnik as a civic architect, an architect of urban buildings and spaces, and this is the bit which I've really been looking forward to talking about.
Yeah,
it's been a bit of a lead up, but we have got there.
Yeah, it's easier to talk about this stuff because it's more obviously fantastic.
Yeah,
you've got some notes.
I've got some notes so I can remember when all the buildings were built.
You sure that's not cheating?
I mean, there are various challenges. One is that there's just much too much work, and it's really a lot of it's really interesting to talk about.
He was a busy bee.
Yeah, he was immensely prolific in this specific location. I've already done a recommendation for visiting Ljubljana, but I don't think there's anywhere else where you can experience such a extensive and complete singular vision, where someone's designed multiple buildings on the same square and the detailing of the square and some funny little buildings in the square and a whole series of different works of different sizes all the way down the street for kind of 5 to 10 minutes walk in any direction. It is pretty unique, and obviously you kind of experience it. He's an extremely unusual designer. He inhabits this sort of ambiguous kind of alternate history space of neoclassicism in the 1920s and 30s,
and 40s and 50s.
Yes, and a little bit of that as well. And on top of that, he's also very original and likes doing slightly strange things. And we're kind of looking at an example of that on our image on the slides, which is one of his column lamppost adornments on the Cobbler's Bridge, one of the bridges he designed.
In most places, by the time people had got electric lights, they'd stopped doing fancy columns as lampposts.
Yeah.
But not here.
So this is a sort of... It's like a kind of archaic ionic column of a kind that would have been made in wood, and here is made in polished concrete terrazzo, with 3 little strange little kind of lights which look like those little
sort of distended oil lamps.
Yeah, or like little terraria. They're that little sort of terrarium shape that your one tragic little cactus lives inside, perched on top of the column, and it's very, very peculiar and rather wonderful, and photographed at the magic hour of dusk on an autumn day. I think we agreed that we were going to talk a bit about the geography of the city and then try and get into it. I don't know how many episodes we're going to get out of this. We're going to try and go at it neither too fast nor too slow, but at just the right pace, and see where that
leads us.
Yeah,
it will be more than one.
Yeah. I mean, broadly, the things that there are to talk about are some commercial buildings. There are some squares, streets, monuments. There's a whole program of work along the river. There's a sort of only partially realised kind of civic heart for the city. There's the library, which is a major building, and various little bits of building around the university, various other bits. His own house, which I think we're not going to talk about on this, but which we might look at in a bonus. And finally, some kind of late cultural projects and unrealised schemes for the post-war Slovenian parliament. So, quite a lot. Yeah, what should we say about Ljubljana? It's got a big hill and it's got a river.
Yeah, so I was going to say it's an old city, but not a huge one, located as cities generally are on a river, and it's at the bend of a river. The river comes in from the east and goes around a corner and broadly goes out from the south. And on the inside of that bend, there's a hill with a castle on it.
Mm.
And on facing that, over the river, was the old Roman town. And wrapping round the base of the hill, around the bend of the river, is a sort of early modern city with a lot of kind of Baroque period buildings on both sides of the river, particularly on the castle side. Then, in the time that Plečnik was there, the city was really expanding a lot and had begun to expand. On the north and slightly to the west, there's a grid. The western side's got the sort of core of the municipal build, the parliament and the kind of big squares and the theatre and the university and that sort of thing, those sort of buildings. And on the north side is the commercial centre, which sort of goes out to the railway tracks, and then beyond that to a big industrial expansion, commercial industrial expansion. And to the south of the centre is a low density, what I think is kind of like infill of where there were little villages and things, and there's houses with gardens. And that's also where Plečnik lived. And it kind of, there's sort of suburbia in that direction. And then there are these two big green spaces which sort of face each other as well. There's the castle, which has got a big park behind it and is on a big bluff overlooking the town. And then there's the big park, which was laid out.
I think it's called
Tivoli Park, which is to the northwest, and is very large and kind of really extends up. And I remember it as having a sort of lower but big wooded hill with a park, and that goes a long way. And that kind of defines the basic geography of the city.
Yes.
And it's worth saying all those things because we're going to deal with projects in those places.
And I think it's worth saying a couple of things. One is that hill in the centre is really quite dramatic. You know, if you're in the centre of town, and kind of really the sort of centre point now is where his triple bridge is on that kind of crossing of the river. Yeah, it's really dramatic. It really feels very, very precipitous. And the other thing to stress is just, you know, it's not an enormous city now, and it was really a very small place then. So from the triple bridge, you can walk to his old house in about 15 minutes or something. And when he lived there, out the bottom of the garden was all fields. So,
and in fact, he did not live in Ljubljana. He lived in a different settlement.
Oh, really? Yes. Okay. That was.
He left Ljubljana to move to a town to the south of Ljubljana, which is now 15 minutes walk from the centre.
Yeah. I think one of the great achievements of his whole programme of work is how wholly convincingly civic the buildings are, given that they were in an absolutely tiny place at the time, and that they do successfully realise the character of a much
a tiny
place,
but did have a real urban core.
Yeah, sure, it did. Yeah,
which doesn't seem to have been obliterated at any point.
No. Yeah, so he first moves to Ljubljana there's a kind of theme in his professional life, which is these sorts of long distance relationships. Like he moves to Ljubljana to become professor at the university there in 1920, just at the very moment that his career as an architect in Prague is starting to take off. He's appointed to the Prague Castle basically at the same moment that he decides to leave Prague, and all of his main commissions, you know, he'd been living in Prague for the decade before that, but basically working as a teacher. Yeah, it's sort of funny because then in Prague he'd been carrying on little bits of work in Vienna still. Yeah, there's a kind of, you know, he's kind of running away from the work almost in a funny way. And
although these places are not vast distances from each other, communications were not as good.
No,
at this time as they are now.
Yeah, so I don't know what the train trip was like. I mean, it was probably not that fast, but kind of achievable. And yeah, he moved to become part of the department of. It was part of the Department of Engineering, the architecture school there. And we got a little photo of some of his students with various bits of work in the background. Rather inconveniently, there was already a professor of architecture when he moved to take up the post, who's a guy called Ivan Vernik. They sort of have to figure out what to do about that. In the end, I think that they decide that Vernik is going to be the professor of kind of technical architecture or something like that, or they figure out a way of living together. We won't talk enormously about Vernik, but he's kind of interesting because he's trying to do a lot of the same things that Plečnik is doing, but in ways which feel like a little bit more in touch with contemporary currents in architecture.
It's funny to say that looking at the buildings, though, because
they are very weird.
If you proposed them
Yeah.
in many other times and places, you would think them quite eccentric.
Yeah, so he did this. He, I think, with his wife, did this amazing building for the cooperative bank in the middle of Ljubljana, which is a sort of national romantic facade, pink with these kind of brightly coloured kind of basket work patterns around the windows, and lots of these kind of very expressive like bay windows, and a big kind of crazy roof that looks like it's taken from a wooden sort of church end or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very, very expressed cornice.
Yeah.
A lot of decoration.
And he also did this very cool sports building, which is, I think, a bit to the north, called the Sakulski Dom, which is a commission for a big, I think, sort of broadly maybe union-aligned kind of sports club. I feel like this is a European thing, these like big sports clubs, like Olympiakos of Athens or whatever, Anyway, so which again is a kind of big national romantic style. It's like a big yellow kind of heavyweight sort of shed, like mega shed, but kind of masonry with
lots of big decorated columns.
Yeah, which are very kind of Valhalla calling kind of,
Yeah, it feels a bit like a mashup of sort of put into the AI engine.
Yeah,
bit Viking,
it is
bit Moorish.
Yeah,
little bit Chinese.
Yeah, why?
Big bit Baroque.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sort of funny, like slightly awkward kind of Baroque away from Italy.
Not bad.
No, cool. It looks great.
Probably a bit jollier than sometimes Plečnik could be a little bit.
Well, yeah, and the comparison is interesting because they're trying to do the same thing, aren't they? They're both trying to invent national monuments, national style for the new nation. Although it's now rather extraordinary, this kind of national romantic type architecture was more conventional at that time than the this kind of idiosyncratic late neoclassical thing that Plečnik is trying to do. And indeed, Vernik would go on in contact with kind of contemporary currents to sort of become more of an international style kind of guy.
But what I would say is sometimes with Plečnik's buildings, you get a sense that they are awe-inspiringly something.
Yeah.
It's a little bit difficult to define what that is. Strange. They create a very strong impression that really feels like it is its own thing.
Yeah.
And it's a sort of encapsulation of something. They're not always like that, but that happens. I don't think Vernik ever quite hit that level.
No, I don't think. No.
I don't think many people would travel to see his buildings.
No, not to the same extent.
They're not really on their own.
They do look very cool, though.
For le voyage.
Yeah, for le détour, maybe. I mean, I encountered that one by mistake. So Plečnik actually he did his own version of this kind of sports club commission. This is one of the sort of minor works that is still worth talking about, which is this big stadium a bit out of town.
Did you go there?
We went past it, but it's extremely not open at the moment, and I didn't feel up to. Well, we were kind of in a hurry, and I also didn't feel particularly up to breaking in with a large group of students.
We didn't break in, but we were let in.
Yeah,
it's a stadium which is made with earth bank with stands.
Yeah,
in a state of whatever it was 15 years ago. It was in a state of pretty advanced decay with a couple of pavilions and a sort of sign.
And it has a big colonnade across along the road on one side, which is actually.
And there are some definite bits of Plečniky detailing, and it felt like it probably would have been quite a fun place.
But so I mean, it's basically got these funny little. It's got these kind of little corner pavilions, which are sort of on the radius, and it's got a big kind of central one. Yeah, they're in a style that we're going to see more of, which is a mixture of relatively sort of crisp classical detailing and then sort of rubbly, stony bits as well, with some brick.
Yeah, I remember
going on.
Kind of rub brick detail, like arch, but I can't really remember it.
Yeah, no, I don't have a huge amount to say about it, except that it's I mean, so this was they were called Orel. I think is another one of these kind of big Catholic social organisations, in this case sort of sporting. It's a sort of a shame that they can't figure out a way to get it back into some kind of use. I can see that it's pretty far from sort of contemporary standards of
it's a bit like
stadium.
An athletic running track
Yeah.
with banked stands without any roof or anything like that.
And that stadium, I think he was working on from the early 1920s. I think that came in 23, although I don't know how long it took to get realised.
So the basic chronology of Ljubljana, which we should probably say, is that he gets the job in the university in
1920, but I think he didn't actually start doing it until 21.
But his big lot of projects only really start probably right at the end of the 20s. And in that period before, he does a couple of things, but he's working more in Prague and teaching in Ljubljana. And then for a few years at the end of the 20s and the beginning of the 30s, he gets an enormous amount of work done. And then some more projects and schemes go on right up until the outbreak of the Second World War in that part of the world, which I think would have been late 1940. It's after the fall of France. One area, the area of the market, sort of their negotiating schemes were building right up to then. And then obviously there's a bit of a gap while the Second World War is happening, and a lot happens. And then he does get to do a few things after the war in what was then Yugoslavia, but not a lot. But he's still producing a lot of schemes. It's a sort of, there's a kind of rumbling start, a real period of frenzied activity, which slowly dies down, breaks off at the war, and then there's a kind of twilight. In which some interesting work is done.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think a relatively early one in terms of both initiation and also completion is this work for the Chamber of Commerce, which, according to my little spreadsheet, is kind of mid-1920s.
And that spreadsheet, I think, records the dates of construction.
I think it's not wholly consistent.
Records some dates associated with the building.
Yeah. So this is kind of an interesting one. It's inside what I take to be a kind of existing 19th century
neo-baroque blocky block.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's sort of vaguely... It's sort of got slightly like sort of Charles Barry kind of vibes. It looks like something from kind of Pall Mall Clubland, but done in a kind of Central European, slightly luridly yellow stucco. Anyway, he's building inside it. He builds a bit on the back in the courtyard and does a lot of the interior fit out. And so that means he does a new staircase. This is a rather amazing staircase, and he does this sort of block that the staircase is within, which has a really fascinating internal facade onto the courtyard. Some big round windows which kind of light onto the stairwell. And then there's also,
the rear facade has got a sort of band of rustication.
Yeah.
But instead of being organised vertically, layers of cake, it's the other way.
Yeah.
Part of the wall is rusticated from the bottom to the top. Yeah. And part is not.
Yeah.
Which is very striking. It feels quite like it could sort of be Paris beginning of modernism, Paris or something like that.
Yeah, it could. It's quite collagey, isn't it?
The openings are a bit big.
There's also a kind of a tolerance of some quite weird juxtapositions in terms of the openings. So there's the two walls come together. You've got these two round openings onto the stairwell. And then you've got these windows, which I guess are slightly adapted from what was there on the rear facade already. But you'd have to say they're sort of slightly awkward, They're kind of halfway up and down on top of each other. They don't line up in any way.
He kind of likes that, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He likes doing things weird.
This rustication is like a sort of kind of wallpaper treatment that's been attacked. I mean, it's like when you sort of select half the lines on Illustrator and like pull it out so that it's way wider than it ought to be.
I mean, it's definitely the back of a building, as in it's not. This isn't the sort of primary front. I think that facade's pretty cool.
It is cool.
Bit cool facade. The interior is one of his first dark, polished dark stone, big lobby rooms.
It's kind of a continuation of a theme from the Prague Castle staircase. There's like different columns as you go up.
Columns that are thin at the bottom and wide at the top as well. The Minoan style.
I see one there. Yes,
I think there are some. I think this project has a few.
And I think there's also some in one of the interiors.
These light fitting, that squiggly thing is a lamp on the top, I think. And that's it's a column a bit like a tornado or something.
It's the Solomonic column, isn't it?
Tapered up so that it's wide at the top and narrow at the bottom.
Yeah, presumably made of wood, it looks like.
There's a lot of sketches
Dark,
of different designs
wood
for that, and it's a lamp, I think, unless they had a few of them. Most of the interiors of this building, I think, are gone.
It's now the Supreme Court, I think, but I think that a lot of a lot of the interiors have been changed, but the staircase is still there.
It's quite a staircase. So
yeah.
all the interior walls are made of polished black stone or dark stone. This one that he uses quite a lot.
Yeah, it's a kind of grey.
Inclusions.
It's a grey limestone, which they have these sort of funny little white. I think they're some kind of fossil.
And it's a cantilevered stair, but with a massive strap. The balustrade is metal, and it's sort of alternating thick and thin bands. And then there's a thing what you'd think would be the sort of beam holding up the staircase, the stringer.
Yeah.
Is that what they call it?
Yeah. It's as if there was a stringer, but it's been kind of shifted up, so it's sort of sitting above the
but that's held up by these sort of bronzy straps that go down to the cantilevered staircases.
Kind of belt buckle kind of looking.
Bit like one of those like thing stuck to a thing Carla Scarpa construction details. Quite cool.
Yeah, it is very cool. It looks like a really great stair.
There's a lot of ornamental architectural features in this, in a kind of thing which is, well, the wall is completely flat and polished, but we're going to have lots of cool sculpted columns of polished stone and lots of fancy decorative ironwork, all of which is fancy variations of stuff which looks like it should sort of be functional but really is decorative.
There's some interest. I mean, there's also, I haven't totally got my head around it, but there's a kind of interior facade in the stair, which is also interesting. Sort of circles and squares and things going.
Well, those are the windows, no?
No, I think those are on the other side, aren't they? I think there's this one. There's
both,
like borrowed light going on from the stair into the...
And kind of multiple marble portals with porticos and things. A lot of cool, rich interior decoration.
Yeah, it looks very cool.
Someone was happy to spend a little bit of money on this one.
Yes, I imagine he's also absolutely prodigious designer of chairs. So
some of the chairs in there look monstrously hard to make.
Yeah, he was confident. He was confident in his ability to realise them.
It would cost quite a lot to have them made now.
I mean, the other of these, I've kind of grouped them because they're these two commercial projects. This is at the end of the 20s. He also built this insurance building it's for a big insurance company, which I think also has some flats on top. Yeah, it's a big insurance company, and it's a sort of, I was comparing it a little bit when we talked about Wagner's Post Office Savings Bank. It's a little bit like that in that it's got to include sort of all of the bureaucratic functions of the insurance company. So lots of people coming in, all sorts of kind of tests and assessments and things getting done. The whole process of actually buying the insurance, getting your policies, all that kind of thing. I think it's opposite the railway station, so I think, people would be popping down from other parts of...
And it feels like it's in a completely different city, which is obviously a sort of 7-minute walk from the one we were talking about earlier. But it's in the grid. It's
turned into a much more kind of Viennese feeling, kind of, big, gritty, blocky...
Yeah, I mean, it's not a completely different sort of plan and scale to the Sackler house.
Yeah.
Similar thing, a corner.
Yeah.
Except it's on two big streets, and bottom 2 stories white stone, top 3.5 brick, with this very strongly expressed kind of regiment of round brick columns on the facade with the brick wall behind them, white stone picking out, and then in one sense it's of the Ljubljana buildings, it feels the most like something that is kind of at home in the modern city.
Yeah, I think you could totally... I could see someone building... They would do maybe a couple more stories, but you could definitely build... Like some of the buildings in the kind of Paternoster Square development behind St Paul's, I feel like, are sort of riffing on...
I slightly wish they were that good.
Obviously they're not, but it's a kind of treatment...
If you made it a bit crapper, if it was proportionally a bit crapper, didn't have as much good decoration... The ornament, wasn't quite as well executed, but was sort of bigger and cheaper.
Yeah.
It could be something in central London, a city with a lot more money.
Yes. Good.
Because actually, it's quite grand.
Yeah, it is. It's got some interesting... I don't actually know in this case. Is all of this real stone, or is some of this manufactured stone? Is some of this concrete? I kind of feel... I
went past this building for 5 minutes, and then went in for another 5 minutes.
Yeah, best part of 2 decades ago. But I think that this again might have some of this kind of polished concrete terrazzo. These balconies which it has, which have, what's the word for these little wobbly balustrades? Don't know.
Yeah.
these kind of
Don't know either.
classic little sort of classical styled balustrades look to me like they've been cast.
I think that's very probably true.
Yeah.
Yes. Although I think probably in quite a labour-intensive way.
Yeah.
I think labour was still pretty cheap.
No, this is the golden age. We've got all the technology, but the people are still cheap. Yeah.
The facade seems at first look to be very much a grid, but like we saw with the Sackler building, particularly in the variations of the designs that weren't executed, there's bits where the grid is kind of got different bits of language. So the first bit's on the corner, the windows are recessed into balconies, but lots of it they're not, and that kind of divides up on the. There are places where it is.
Yeah, it goes forward and back
and it kind of, if it wasn't like that, it would be obviously too long and boring.
Yeah.
But there are quite a few changes in the rhythm.
Yeah.
Of this, which I think is very. I mean, it's not a novel trick in a block building. You know, if they're like long and wide.
Yeah.
If you just do the same thing with the grid all the way down,
pop it in and out.
It's boring and oppressive.
Yeah.
But he's managed to execute that very well. And also the decoration is quite lovely.
Yeah,
there's a lot of sort of Viennese. I mean, it's not, but you know, something that if you didn't look at it very closely would feel kind of Viennese, the sort of sculptures on the top of the columns. Really nice. And it's got a quite interesting staircase as well.
Yeah.
Off the first lobby, which is, well, it's four-sided, but going to a fairly tight point. I mean, it doesn't look that tight in the plan.
Yeah, what is that? It's a kind of it's a tall trapezium, leaning slightly to the right.
And it feels like a little bit like a larger staircase has been shrunk down, but exclusively by shrinking the stairwell, so that there are a lot of these lovely polished stone columns, all very close to each other, sort of stacking up and seeming quite irregular as you go up the stairs.
They're all crowded together like strangers on a tube train or something, aren't they? They're really, you know, at one end they're literally kind of four really close to each other because they're...
But this photograph that we're seeing, and those of you who are looking at us on the video will see as well, makes it feel like the stairs is really small, but it isn't really small. It's actually pretty big and grand.
Yeah.
It's just a bit odd. Quite nice, though.
He seems to be totally agnostic about how figured or not. So this, again, it's this black limestone. Some of them have got loads of white sort of smeary bits in. Some of them are, you know, nearly black. There doesn't seem to be any sorting of which ones to include or not.
If there's something that can be justified and arbitrary, he loves it.
Yeah, no, I think he loves the difference, how different they are, and this kind of slightly like patchworky kind of poetics, I think, is part of it. And then again, we've got this sort of funny metamorphic game where we've got a kind of balustrade element, which is
completely freestanding.
Yeah, freestanding. It's sort of quite correctly kind of proportioned and sort of neoclassical looking, but it's actually executed in wood instead of stone for some reason. It's sort of polished, kind of looks sort of like polished kind of grand piano style.
But thick and heavy. Yeah.
Kind of wood.
The combination of elements which individually seem very correct and tough, being combined together in a difficult and strange way.
Yeah.
Where each thing individually feels quite correct but perhaps not particularly wild.
Yeah.
To make the whole thing feel deeply disconcerting is, and the more you look, the more disconcerting everything gets.
The entrance lobby is quite strange. Feels rather sort of dark and unlit, like round space.
Did you go in there?
And it's got an absolutely enormous statue of St. Michael, I think, in it. So tall. It's like Alice in Wonderland. His head is kind of pressing against the ceiling. This was very much a Christian country. They had a little chapel downstairs, and there's a sort of unexpected amount of like religious infrastructure for a seemingly godless and secular building.
Yeah, I don't know how general that is. I mean, a lot of these really worth looking at period interior photographs of these, because the amount of cool period interior stuff, the amount of furniture and fittings he designed that have been lost over the years, they are absolutely amazing.
That table is so cool. I love this. It's a sort of quite small round tabletop on a kind of barrel-sized or kind of enormous bucket-sized support with kind of wiggly design on it. It looks amazing and totally kind of unclassifiable.
A deeply impractical table for those chairs.
Yes.
But the assembly looks fantastic.
Yeah, it does. It does. I love it.
Around the back, it looks like a Berlin Siedlung.
Yeah, it's really strange, isn't it? So I think that there are some flats on some of these upper floors. So I think that the way it works is that this funny tower around the back is it's a staircase going up to.
So we're looking at a photograph which really is, it looks like the back of a deck access housing.
Yeah.
It's got a stair, a kind of the whole thing is like creamy yellow. It's all flat render, international modernist. It's the back of that stair.
Yeah. Anyway, very cool. Very, still a minor work in the context of everything we've got to talk about, but like a very cool building.
High quality office building, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know where are they getting this money from?
I don't know. Yeah, everything is so high spec, and it's so
the specification on that is. I don't think you could do that. I don't think that would be cheaper to build than like another bit of Buckingham Palace.
Yeah,
all those bits, all that interior furniture, all that, so much stonework, fancy stonework, and fancy, extremely high spec custom furniture. I mean, I know stuff was cheaper, but
yeah. When Gaudi does stuff, it's like, well, yeah, he did design as if he had infinite money, and quite often he literally did have infinite money. But that's obviously not the case here. Not sure that the mutual insurance company of Ljubljana has had infinite resources. So
they're definitely higher spec than the imperial pomp headquarters of like the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation or whatever.
Yeah. Don't know.
Big commercial enterprises.
They were just good at procurement somehow. Yeah. We were able to get it done.
I don't mean, in the terms of absolute scale and things, obviously not, but the interiors are pretty swanky.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a kind of second sort of strain of work that he does, where there's a bit less to talk about because he does a bunch of squares, basically. He does a bunch of squares and public spaces. Kind of urban design is a little bit hard to say that much about. I mean, he designed a number of major public spaces.
So what was his role? Because it feels like he was the city architect for the amount of urban design work that he did. Do you know what his role was?
I don't think he had an official role at the city architects, but there was a chief planner or like a head of the works department who was a guy called Matko Prolovšek, who was a particular fan who he built a house for.
I'm glad you pronounced that surname, because I don't know how to.
Well, I don't know how. I've probably done it wrong, but anyway. I think at some point also the city architect is a kind of ex-student of his or something. So I think...
But he does even produce a comprehensive plan for the city, which includes a mixture of work that was done and wasn't done.
So look, I think that there's some stuff I don't really understand about how he gets the work and how the work gets done, because I think that there's also a problem where at a certain point in time he must have been doing so much work that I struggle to see how you would have been able to execute it without quite a substantial office. And I've never really understood. The story I've always been told is that he was basically like living on his university salary, and then he did these pieces of work, but it wasn't really a business, his work for the city. And I just can't see...
But there are literally dozens of projects executed within 3 years,
I just can't... I can't understand how it got done. Like, I think that you...
To me, it feels like if you had 20 people working on it in that time, you could...
Yeah.
It's like that sort of... You wouldn't need a vast
team. The documentation was less extensive in those days
or maybe,
than it is today.
Maybe you could do it with 10 people, but you couldn't do it with 2.
Yeah, you couldn't have done
I don't think he physically could have drawn up... I think he could have sketched everything that was...
Yeah.
Because a lot of these projects, he designed a lot of things for them. Not all of them, but there are a lot of objects that are designed and then manufactured to sort of tolerance. So there must have been people producing finished drawings, and there must have been people producing construction information. I don't think...
Yeah, so I mean, a kind of a contemporary figure, I know that having read Luchin's biography, he worked very, very long hours. He did design everything. He worked very, very long hours, and he had sort of 24 chaps who were drawing up all the sketches and turning them into drawings continuously, and that was how the work got done. Yeah, you would.
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest that other people are designing the things. That
Yeah.
It all feels very much like there is an authorial hand.
Yeah, no, I think it must have been, but the picture that I've been,
But
the only picture of how he worked that I've been given is, him and a few favoured students around the big table in the studio in his house, which to me is not really plausible as in kind of bandwidth.
I mean, the real
terms.
image that he produces
yeah.
is him as a mystic with
Yeah.
a beard, summoning the stuff out of the ether.
You can't produce such good buildings to such a high standard without an awful lot of documentation and wrangling. And I feel like he must have unofficially had a bunch of people working for him, either at the city or at the university, on a sort of more or less continuous basis for much of that kind of
there's
great
a lot
decade.
of correspondence involved in procuring something.
Yeah, you've got to go.
In general,
I
I can hope that this was part of some sort of previous epoch.
Yeah.
But I just don't believe that there wouldn't have still been a certain amount of.
Yeah, there's a lot of wrangling. You've got to keep going to see them and say, no, you've got that wrong. Though, talk it through again, produce some more drawings to explain the things they don't understand.
Yeah.
And nowadays, like even the facade of the insurance building that we've just talked about, which is, far from the most significant bit of work that he's doing that in that period. One or two people would need to work on that continuously over a period of years to get that done.
Yeah,
to a high
nowadays
standard.
I feel that facade would be
that'd be your whole job.
That'd be like 2 or 3 people full time for a couple of years.
Yeah.
To actually get it done that well, because you'd have to supervise it quite. You'd either have to do extremely precise specification or supervise it quite well.
All the while we've been talking, I've had on screen this painting of the ideal city, which is one of this series of ideal city paintings from the 15th century.
His ideal city is quite different.
It is quite different, but there are some things which do kind of come out of it. Like the Renaissance ideal city here is sort of very symmetrically arranged. I guess what it does share with his is this sort of carpet of beautifully coloured paving, and then also there are lots of things on columns, which are sort of an important part of the space.
But something that I find very attractive about and in fact, I find all of his work very interesting, but I find the urban interventions very attractive because it's not just him.
Yeah.
And the old city is asymmetric and has a grain that operates at several levels.
Yeah.
And that means that instead of the interventions which can exist from the scale of a lamppost to, a big building or square, instead of them being like this ideal city, arranged in point and counterpoint within symmetry, with large spaces, within large and consistently large spaces, they exist sort of expanding from a big square to a narrow passage to a lamppost, to a river, the walk along a river, a bridge, often in picturesque compositions where there will be a small thing in the foreground, a long look, big thing in the background, combining together pre-existing objects, natural objects, little interventions, to create both picturesque views, but also routes where this change of environment is stimulating and wonderful. In the city, you can have an element that is grand and commodious, but also it's very attractive when you're wandering around a dense city, when it is wonderful, when you experience moments of wonder and actually just turning around the corner and being confronted with a sculptural lamppost in a tight place and then coming out from a busy place to a quiet place to a river is wonderful if you are receptive to it. And even if you're not, it's kind of, I think, slightly elevating. So we have moved on to Camillo Sitte.
Yeah, so the Viennese urbanist Camillo Sitte brought out his great book, which is called, Urban Planning Considered Artistically, or something like that. That came out, I think, in the year that Plečnik started architecture school. So it's kind of a very contemporary thing. And Sitte did do an urban plan. I think that he may have done the first grid plan for Ljubljana. I'm not sure how much of it was built, but he also had a role there in the past. And yeah, his book is, which I think maybe we'll do an episode on it sometime, because it's kind of interesting. But he does lots and lots of studies of existing historic cities, their main public spaces, and he does these block plans, basically sort of examining how interesting and irregular their spaces are, and what it is about them that makes them work so well. As it's very much that, like that you experience them sort of through time, and they kind of unfold as like a sequence of different views and moments. His agenda is very much obviously about sort of breaking away from these kind of fixed neoclassical ideas about what a good public space should be like, these kind of big symmetrical sort of geometries, trying to appreciate more fully these much more irregular, much more kind of accretive and sort of interesting ones that you find in the great Italian cities.
Regular things can be cool too.
They're nice as well.
I think they wanted them in the Renaissance though, because they all lived in Italian Renaissance cities, which are all incredibly higgledy-piggledy.
Yeah.
And then when you go from something higgledy-piggledy to a moment of order, it's very striking.
Yeah.
You know, going into the
it's
what is now
holiday,
the Place du Vosges in Paris or something from the Marais. Or I feel they made a mistake in clearing out the bit in front of the Vatican. Because I think just going into that space from a nest of streets would have been pretty cool.
Yeah. Mussolini did that.
Yes.
Not a great town planner, along with various other problems.
Is the bottom image some classical reconstruction
I think that's
of
a
Verona?
classical reconstruction, yeah. I can't remember.
Or somewhere.
Athens, yeah.
Athens?
Yeah, apparently. It's a bit of an Athens
There's an optimistic classical reconstruction of Athens, and...
there's another one.
Yep.
That's...
but it's dense, picturesque, operates on a number of scales.
Yeah.
And that's very lively and exciting. I think it's something we may conclude when we finish talking through the main bit of Plečnik work in Ljubljana, that the city was very well served to have him do these projects, because although his style is quite idiosyncratic and I could imagine could divide opinion elsewhere, I would hope he's quite popular. I don't know. I think many people could not carry off the combined challenges of designing in an interesting way all these interventions. I think that's very challenging. And also getting them executed. I think those two things require an almost superhuman force of energy. Yeah.
So the final of these like reference pictures I've got is, I think this is Leo von Klenser's reconstruction of, it's a painting of the Acropolis in Athens. Yeah, that's another source, is that Plečnik was clearly very interested in the architecture of ancient Greece, as well as that of Italy and the Etruscans and things like that. Yeah, there's an awful lot in, we've sort of talked about this on the bonus, but like there's an awful lot in the architecture of ancient Greece which is not part of canonical neoclassicism. It's stranger, more interesting,
I'm
more
sure
irregular.
We've said this many times. Neoclassicism is not like classical architecture.
Yeah.
Its spirit is very, very different.
Yeah. I'm not sure it's necessarily the best picture of it, but it's quite a nice painting. There's a kind of funny symmetry between Plečnik and Le Corbusier. Like the more I learn about Plečnik, the more I kind of think, that's another like Le Corbusier crossover. They both have this they both like discover a lot of their architecture in contact with ancient Greece. They both also love early Christian architecture. That's also a sort of a kind of obsession that's there with both of them.
I can see how Corbusier discovers a lot of his architecture in early Greece, but there's an awful lot that is really not.
Yeah.
Actually.
They both love concrete.
Yeah.
Both love concrete. What
may I ask is there not to love?
Yeah, what is there not to love about it? There's because in every other way they're about as opposite as you could imagine for two contemporaries. But it's interesting how much they share.
Architecture seems now looked at superficially, deeply normative, and what is also very weird. Both of them are pretty weird in what they do. much weirder than they seem.
Okay, well, I mean, after that little interlude, we could talk about some squares. So the squares that Plečnik, the sort of squares and kind of urban spaces that Plečnik does, we're going to particularly talk about Congress Square. It's kind of in the Baroque bit of the city, and there's basically a big square.
Yeah, on the right bank.
Yeah. There's a big square. There's a big park, but you get this kind of whole like assemblage of different elements. So you've got the square itself, which he designs a kind of floor treatment for, and which he lays out.
So the space of the square was pre-existing.
Yeah.
And it was large. I would say too large to be just open for that city.
There's a park that's laid out as well, but he also redesigned, kind of talked his way, I think, into redesigning the facade of this big Baroque church, which is at one end. And he also did a bunch of work for the Philharmonic, which is at the other end of the square, including actually mostly around the back of it, not the bit facing onto the square, and these staircases which go down on either side and access the riverbank. And then within the square, he also designed a whole series of different bits, and there's some lampposts, and there's also a little pavilion. And there was a now destroyed sort of belvedere dedicated to the King of Yugoslavia as well.
Well, could I say? I mean, do you want to say what you think he's doing, or shall I do that?
Well, I think it's kind of an example of this like Plečnik Ljubljana condition, that there is not really many other places where you get an architect doing so many different bits and getting to join everything together and getting to to execute a sort of singular vision. And to have so free a hand, really. It's also very the square is obviously a big sort of unifying element, but it's also sort of quite piecemeal. He's like joining together lots of different bits. He's doing little bits of sort of urban renovation.
So these are things that I would say is going on. The square is large and square. It's got one side which has got kind of two buildings depth of the river, and the other side which has got the Philharmonic on it. The Philharmonic goes between the square and the river. The other side facing it, the Philharmonic is in a corner. Facing the Philharmonic, there's this big church with the Baroque. Behind that, there's the kind of, I think, Ravnica Civic Centre, and actually the Parliament's not very far away. The square is big, and so he's broken off perhaps a bit more than a quarter of it, which is the width between the Philharmonic and the church. That's got a paving in front of it, which is quite reminiscent. It's a grid of lighter grey squares with dark grey grid between them in large concrete. Which is very like the one he did in Prague Castle, which is in sort of fancy stone there. And then off that is a star which is most of the square of grass and trees.
Yeah.
In this sort of you do a cross, and then you have the diagonal
classic
of the cross.
like Parisian style kind of.
And then there's the two big roads which form a kind of L, taking up the rest of the space. The trees mean that it's not too big. You've got now a kind of open hard square with an axis. Yeah. Because originally there wasn't really any central bits, so you've created a kind of central view that way, which is nicely sort of separated from the road. Yeah. So it feels like a nice urban room that's fitting like that. In the Philharmonic corner, it goes through to a kind of little slanted square that slants down to the river. So that whole corner is quite animated. And then on the other side, the Philharmonic is a tight staircase with one of the fanciest lamps in it, which goes down to this tight, so it's kind of introducing a tighter space and a tighter space of the walk along the river, which we'll talk about. It's creating different and kind of more manageable grades of city space. I don't think this is stuff that only he could do. Yeah. But to be able to do those things, it's well executed and sort of makes sense.
Yes, no, it's another example of these weird ionic concrete terrazzo with built-in light fittings elements.
But you look up from the river, you see the stairs, you see that.
You see
and you see the
church behind.
And then you go up and you've got a square that feels small because it's that. Yeah. I mean, not small, it's quite big. But it feels kind of urban, but with trees. And actually, yeah,
it's nice. It's nice, this big checkerboard. I think that initially there was some kind of technical failure in the square. I think this has been restored. I think that the initial paving asphalt solution, whatever it was, fell apart after a few years. I think it's
yep, sounds believable.
Yeah, but now,
so what did you do to this church? When I was there, I wasn't aware I'd done anything to that.
So I think that it previously had a different treatment at ground level. but he basically dressed the ground level of it to make it more appropriate to its position on the square. I think he might also have done. I honestly don't know, but he did like some sort of piecemeal renovation essentially of it, specifically to make it more appropriate to its position on this new big civic space. And I think that's kind of, he was able to sort of propose and talk his way into doing that and get it done. I think it's a kind of interesting and kind of characteristic. And then there are these very, these idiosyncratic little bits of stuff, this sort of funny little tiny pavilion, what is this, for selling newspapers or cigarettes or something? And then round the back of the Philharmonic, he builds like an extra bit which kind of wraps the back of it, and which is a sort of big stucco mass, but with a kind of scalloped plan sort of treatment across the back. It's
yeah, I'd wondered when I saw this if the Nottingham Contemporary facade was at all.
I'm sure they've got the idea from there. Yeah. Nottingham Contemporary, the Caruso St John building, or the now disappeared Carmody Groke filling station project in King's Cross. I think are both like, because I think people are, there's that kind of generation of architects are into. It's just that
it's not that it would be impossible to come up with this idea without it. It's just that these people, I'm pretty sure, do know this building.
Yeah, no, I think they like him. Yeah,
and difficult to photograph because it's got trees right in front of it.
Yeah.
But it's quite a nice little intervention.
Yeah, and and then you've got some urns. Important to get some urns in there. Which are all made of concrete.
There's some. Do you think he's the last great exemplar of urn fever? He's done some really high quality urns.
Yeah, I think there's... Who else really...
That urn that's on the front of the book that's in Prague Castle, I think.
That's a hell of an urn, isn't it?
That's an urn of...
Yeah,
that's an urn of... Yeah, it's a 5-star urn.
An urn and 3/4, yeah. Yeah. So these are more... They're sort of tallish, amphora-looking urns. But yeah, they're cast in sort of attractive grey, slightly rough-surfaced concrete with nice brackets underneath them, and they really bring the whole thing together, don't they? It's all very good.
Yeah, with a lot of these projects, there's too many. We will have to say that some things are just sort of good and let people
discover them for themselves,
figure it out.
But yeah, I think that's like a particular example of what it's like going to Ljubljana with Plečnik in mind. You sort of, it's like, oh, there's a bit. It's
easy when you're going around to forget about things like the paving and and where the trees are in the park, though.
Do we want to do an episode break there, or do we want to?
Yeah, how long have we recorded for?
Well, that's a good question. We'll have a little break there. That's really just getting into it. On the next episode, we're going to start talking about the river, a major focus for him.
What's it called? I've forgotten.
I think it's called the Ljubljana River, isn't it?
Maybe.
Yeah, it's called the Ljubljanica.
Cool. That makes sense.
Conveniently. We're going to talk about the river and the many projects that kind of positioned up all along it.
There's a number of places where little kind of routes are marked out, but the main one is the route down the river, which is just a whole string of projects, bridges and interventions.
Very good. Okay, well, we'll see you on that one. Thanks a lot for listening. Remember that you can get links to everything on our website, which is aboutbuildingsandcities.org. See you on the next one.